Welcome to the channel. Thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you being here. This is the next segment of Scientology stories. No matter how you first heard about Scientology, we hope you will learn from these stories and that we can educate you in the language and practices of Scientology along the way. And here's an important note. Whether you're currently in Scientology, an ex-Scientologist, or simply just curious about hearing stories of what really goes on in Scientology, you should know Scientology does not want you to hear these stories. So we appreciate you being here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And most of all, thank you for sharing and helping us to educate people on the true nature of Scientology. And with that, I'd like to welcome our guest for today. This is part 2 with Mr. Mark Fisher. Welcome back to the channel, Mark.
Okay. Hi, Claire.
Hi. I appreciate you being here again to help me educate people on the true nature of Scientology, like I just said.
It's my pleasure. I mean, the more information we can get out there and the more people see it, hopefully it'll save people who are in, that maybe will get out, and also keep people from getting involved.
Yes, absolutely. And before we resume your story, I thought I would just ask you for what feedback you've had from part 1.
Yeah, I got, first of all, we've had quite a few viewers, which was great, and lots of nice comments, which was great. But I've had family members that, I've been in touch with all these years, but they didn't really know my full story, but they watched it, and it really filled in a lot of information that they didn't have. And same thing with an old friend that I had from high school, it's great, because you know how it is. You have all this information, and your life is your life, but a lot of people don't understand what it is you went through. And I'm just sharing. The purpose in sharing, like I said, is to help others.
It's awesome.
If there's any Scientologists watching, or OSA or whatever, these stories are true. I don't have any, I'm not making any money on this. I've never made any money on it. I'm just speaking out because I think the truth should be out there for people.
I agree. Amen to that. Education and knowledge is power. If people know the truth, they can make the
informed decisions.
Exactly. That's right. And more importantly, we can let people know what their tax exempt dollars to Scientology are being used for.
That's right. That's right. Because they do some dastardly things. Absolutely.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And so to resume where we had left off in part 1, and again, for the listening audience, I will link to part 1 in the description for this video. But we had covered at the very end, your final meeting with security with Jackson and your ex-wife. And so let's just pick up there, if that's good with you, and tell me where you went, what happened, what was that like?
Okay. Well, I mean, that basically after I left the security office, they took me out to, we had a storage unit in town at one of the apartment places, and security went through all of my stuff. They wouldn't let me take anything that had any Sea Org emblems on it. They wouldn't let me take any photographs that I had. I had lots of photographs over the years that none were allowed to be taken. As a matter of fact, the only ones that you've seen that that you showed on the last episode or whatever were photos that I'd sent to my family, as showing them that I got married, things like that.
Yes.
Otherwise, I wouldn't have any records whatsoever because they took them all.
Yes, they did the same to us when we left.
Yeah, and they even took things like that I paid for. Do you know what I mean? Like I had a gold RTC ring that we were awarded as a Christmas bonus. It was a solid gold ring, but we had to pay for the thing, and they wouldn't let me take that. They just took it. You know what I mean? So, I mean, I would have gladly taken the value of gold at the time.
Right. Yeah. And it was yours. Your personal
mine,
belonging.
But they just took it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, so as soon as I was done with that, I drove off, and I had my car. That let me take my car, obviously, because that was what I worked out with Julie and my wife. I took off, and I drove west to the Pacific Coast Highway and drove up PC1 all the way up to San Francisco, just sightseeing along the way, trying to figure out what the heck have I just gone through and where am I going?
I
So I
can't
drove
imagine. I know
up the
that feeling
highway.
quite well.
Yeah, yeah, it was,
And
and I
sorry, so and this was again just for timeline purposes. So we're talking September 1990.
that's correct. Yeah,
Okay.
September 1990.
Okay.
And then from going up to San Francisco, I drove over to Lake Tahoe and in Nevada, and then I drove all the way down to Las Vegas, and then from Las Vegas, I finally decided, well, I couldn't go to my mother. My mother would not have understood. She lived on the East Coast. She wouldn't have understood anything that was going on. I couldn't go to my father and my brother because, as far as I knew, they were, I knew they were declared as suppressive people.
Right.
And I hadn't been in touch with them for like 12, 13 years. I didn't even know if they'd even talk to me.
I understand.
So I didn't know where to go. And I did have money, right? And so I told Julie, my wife at the time, that I would really, but then I had no choice. So I went to San Diego and knocked on the door of her father, her stepmother, and they took me right in.
Wow. And they were not Scientologists, obviously.
No, no, they knew of Scientology, but they weren't just, and they took me in, with open arms, and I'm forever grateful for that because I didn't know where to go, and
Yeah.
so I was there for about a week or so, and then I decided to go to Hawaii for 10 days. So I bought a plane ticket by myself and I flew to Hawaii, and just to sort of just everything calm down and figure out what the heck am I going to do. And I went to Hawaii, and then that was one of the pictures I sent when I got back to San Diego. I got back to Julie's father's house, and the phone rang, and I picked it up, and there was a woman on the line, and she said, "Hi, is this the blah blah whose daughter is Julie?" And I went, "Janice," and it was Janice Grady
Oh my
who had
goodness.
tracked me down,
Who had also recently escaped from
who had just
Scientology.
left like 2 months and a half before. And people
Okay.
have to realize this is before the internet. This is before cell
Yes.
phones. This is when we had home lines, and it was yellow pages and white pages books, and there was no computers. So it was, how do you find people? You go through the phone book or you call information. So she tracked me down because my ex-wife's maiden name was Catano, and that's kind of an unusual name. And she knew that Julie her family was from San Diego area. So she just went through had contacted and called up the number, and I answered the phone.
And did Janice know that you had escaped or that you'd
Yeah, she
left?
had heard that. She had heard
Okay.
that. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, because what happened was, probably 6 months before Janice and Paul left, her sister Terry and Terry's husband Fernando. Yeah, Terry, I told you before, she was one of the original messengers Commodore's messengers along with Janice on the ship with LRH,
Yes.
and then she also was a high-ranking executive at Author Services with David Miscavige. Well, her and her husband had blown in February the year before and taken off cross country,
Yes.
and
Blown
they were
meaning
followed.
they escaped, in
They
Scientology
escaped.
terms, unauthorized departure, aka escape.
Yeah, and they were tracked. I remember because I was still working for David Miscavige at the time. They had private investigators tracked them all the way across country. They were driving across to Florida to Terry's husband Fernando's family, and they had tails on them all the way across country. And I'll save Terry. Terry has a story about things that happened on that, and that's her business to tell. So
Of
I won't
course.
tell those.
Yeah.
But anyway, so she was in Florida, and then when one of the times when I was on doing manual labor, when after I'd left one time, they always hit you with the standard, well, if you leave, what are you going to do? You'll be flipping hamburgers at McDonald's. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
standard story they use.
It is.
But also,
We've all heard that line. It's so funny that none of us are flipping burgers, and honestly, it would have been a joy to
yeah,
flip burgers
yeah, it's
compared to
just
our
that was
lives
just a
there.
classic line. But
Yeah.
anyway, so Terry and Fernando, they were in Florida, and then Janice and Paul, they were in Santa Paula, California, just north of Los Angeles, with her brother. And they were trying to figure out what to do. So they had already contacted Terry, and somehow through the grapevine, they had heard that I had left.
Okay.
I immediately the next day said, "Hey, I'm coming up to see you guys." So I drove up to California and reconnected with Janice and Paul, And we all kind of decided, well, let's try and figure out. We had no idea what we were going to do for money. Had no resume. I mean, I was 32 years old. I did a lot of things in Scientology, but nothing that they would ever confirm if I put it on a resume. So
Of
I
course.
had no idea what we were going to do. Anyway, so we decided, well, why don't we go into business together? We'll do something. So at first we thought we would move down to San Diego because we all thought, hey, it'd be nice to live in San Diego. It's beautiful down there. Who doesn't want to live in San Diego?
Yes.
But there was no work. There was no work at that time. This is 1990, the fall, and it was very expensive to live there, and there was no work. So what happened was Terry had a friend that she knew in Scientology who used to be a public person. I think he's kind of under the radar, as you say,
Yes.
and he
Meaning
was in the
he was supposedly a Scientologist, but not really.
yeah, he was kind of disenchanted with what was going
Yes,
on, like a
right.
lot of people were at the time. But he was a public paying Scientologist. He wasn't a staff member, but he
Okay.
was a very successful mortgage broker. Okay, and he had had a big mortgage company in the Los Angeles area, and then he had moved to Denver, Colorado. But he was planning on moving to Las Vegas.
Okay.
And so he talked to Terry, and he said, well, why don't you guys come to Las Vegas and I'll teach you the mortgage business. You guys can work as mortgage lenders and that type of thing. So we thought, okay. And plus also Time Magazine had put out an article that year that Las Vegas was Boomtown, USA. It was a cover story, you know.
Nice.
So that's how we ended up moving to Las Vegas.
Nice. All right. And so what month and year was it when you moved to Vegas?
It was Terry, Fernando, and I. We came like right around December before Christmas of 1990, and
Okay.
then Paul and Janice came shortly, like a month or so later. And like all Sea Org members, we didn't have very much money, but so we got a 2-bedroom apartment with 2 bathrooms, and Paul and Janice was pregnant with her son John at the time, and Paul and Janice were in 1 bedroom. Fernando and Terry in the other bedroom, and of course I slept on the pull-out couch in the living room.
Okay.
So we were roughing it.
Yeah, no doubt for
And we
sure.
started learning the mortgage business and making some money, but we weren't making very much. I mean, we were really scratching it. I found out, when I left, I told you last time that I had some money, but the other thing I found out, I didn't find out. I had credit cards. While I was in the Sea Org, Mark Yeager, who was the commanding officer CMO, he applied for an American Express card personally. This was years before we left,
Okay.
and he found out you just put down what you made and they didn't verify your income. And American Express wasn't a credit card, it was a charge card. So in other words, if you charged $300, the next bill you had would be $300. So it just was a way of using it like a debit card is now, right? So
Yes.
he got approved for it. So we all did it. We all got the American Express cards. And when when we were in senior management and in Religious Technology Center and CMO, we didn't get to go shopping. So we were catalog shoppers.
Yes.
We get the, Spiegel catalog or Victoria's Secrets or Banana Republic. And so we would order things. And of course, since we had money, the bill would come in and we just pay it. We always had a zero balance on our card.
Nice.
But
So
over the
you were
years,
building up credit, in other words,
yeah, and so
unlike most Sea Org members.
that's exactly right. I'm an
Yes.
exception. I'm not the
Yes.
rule.
No,
Okay.
I totally understand. I know Mark and I always joke that, and it's not a joke, it's a true story, but when we left, we tried to go buy a car and we had, more than 50% of the payment of the car, and they said, "Well, you have no credit." And we're like, "Well, that's good, right? We don't have bad credit." And they're like, "No, that's way worse.
I know.
Are
I
you
know.
drug dealers?" And we're like, "No." never never done anything like that. We just worked at a place where we only used cash, and they were like, "Yeah, we don't know what that is."
That happened to us too. We paid cash. Julie and I paid $6,500 cash for our used Honda that we had, when I was in the Sea Org. But then when I went to get a car, like you said, a year out, I wanted to get a new car. It was the same thing. I had good credit, but I didn't have any credit. In other words, they go like, you don't have any history of paying for a car. So
Right.
anyway,
Yes.
but when I get back to it, I got that American Express card. But then over the years, while you're in Scientology, they start sending you other credit cards.
Right.
You know what I mean? Next thing you know, you've got a MasterCard and then a Visa and this and that. So I had credit cards and they all had zero balance when I left. Well, I didn't realize that when I left, I had $41,000 worth of available credit.
Wow.
Okay.
That's
Which I
that's
proceeded.
definitely not the norm for a Sea Org
No, it's
member.
not. It's
Yeah.
not. But the problem was is that we weren't making enough money. So I was living, I had no idea I didn't know how a credit card worked. I was
Right.
32 years old. I'd never been in the real world. So I was using the credit cards to pay bills and live off of, so I got in a lot of trouble with that, but
I
anyway.
understand.
so we were working that and doing that. And then that's when we first, we didn't know at the time, but that's when we hired Scientology, sent in their first private investigator spy, to look in on us. And that's a guy named Dave Lubow, who's kind of famous. So I don't know if
Yes,
you want to show a
absolutely.
picture.
Yeah, I'll pull up the picture here. And so, and you of course had no idea that he was a PI. Here's the first picture. So go ahead and tell us when this was and how this all came to happen.
Sure, that's me, and that's Dave Lubow, and that would have been in probably the spring of 1991. And
so you hadn't even been gone a year yet, and they're sending in private investigators. And I'm sure, just as a side comment, that what specifically drove David Miscavige nuts about your situation is that you had reconnected with Janice, Paul, Terry, Fernando, all top executives, all who had been top executives in Scientology.
That's exactly right.
And so he started.
What are you doing? What are they doing?
Thousands, if probably millions by the end of it. But I'll let you answer that question. But go ahead.
Yeah, well, it's funny too, because I only recently found out during one of Mondays with with Mike, Mark, and Aaron, that I asked a question of Mike. I said, how did you guys ever find this guy, Dave Lubow? Anyway, it turns out that he was a mechanic at an off-road vehicle business that Scientology's main private investigator at the time, a guy by the name of Eugene Ingram,
yes.
And he was working for him just as a mechanic, and he needed somebody to go to Las Vegas. And he thought that this guy would be the right person to go. So this was his first operation that they used.
First assignment for
its first assignment. Yeah.
First Scientology private investigator.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't know that until about 2 weeks ago. We didn't know, how he got there. We found out, we knew he was we eventually found out he was a private eye, but we didn't know how he started. But anyway,
how did he come into your life? How did he present himself?
Sure. So we basically were working at this mortgage company, 9 to 5, and we were learning how to do mortgage loans. And he applied as an employee. He applied to be a loan officer at the mortgage company, and so he got hired. And he was a very friendly guy, and we were very friendly too. Right. So, and I gotta say this too. We were, at least I was extremely naive. I don't know I can't speak for the other people, but I was extremely naive, because when you're in Scientology, you trust people to tell you the truth, because if they don't, it's found out about, you know what I mean? Through security checking or whatever. And that had been my life for the previous 15, 16 years,
Yes.
So you took people, or at least I did, you took them at face value. You never thought that somebody would have, and that actually, I got burned several times. I'm sure others did too. I mean, I literally would trust people who were lying to my face, and I just didn't know any better. You know what I mean?
OSA was banking on that, of course.
Yeah. And it was a learning curve, Plus, when we left, we still were dedicated Scientologists. I mean, we were of the opinion that, L. Ron Hubbard's going to come back, and when he comes back, he'll see what Miscavige has been doing, and he'll get rid of him, and then we can come back in the Sea Org. I mean, literally, that was our viewpoint. We used to get together and talk about it, Yeah. So it takes time for the onion to unpeel. You know what I mean?
It sure does.
That type of thing. And I'll tell you about how I finally, got out of it. But anyway, he came, and we hired him as an employee, and then that's our apartment complex where we lived. He got an apartment in the same complex, right?
Okay.
And the apartment
convenient.
complex. Yeah, and the apartment complex had a racquetball court, indoor racquetball court, and we liked to play racquetball. He'd play racquetball with us, and then we would go to dinner and lunch with him, and he became our friend. And we didn't think anything of it. We started telling him about that we've been in Scientology and all that. We were disseminating to him. We actually gave him a Dianetics book, and we were telling him about the powers of Scientology. In other words, we had nothing to hide. You know what I
No,
mean? We just
I
wanted to get
understand.
we
I know
wanted to
it's
get on with our life. We
yeah,
had no idea he was a spy, and he basically was eating it up. And so we didn't find out 2 years later when in 2009, when Marty Rathman, was out and spoke to the Tampa Bay Times in the Truth Rundown series, that Lubow, that DM was getting these reports from Dave Lubow, and he loved it. He loved getting the information. And so and apparently the reports, which is true, is that our upset wasn't with Scientology and L. Ron Hubbard, it was with David Miscavige. So
right.
that made us even more of a target to him.
Right. So
So
that fueled
so he
David
said, keep
Miscavige to
the reports
continue
coming.
spending money on private investigators
Right.
to
Right.
closely
And
watch
they
over you.
spent, I don't even know how much they spend, but I know that, over the years, they had a private investigator that followed Pat Broker for 20 years. And these two private investigators were paid over $20 million. It's
Right.
just crazy.
Yeah.
So
I
anyway,
know it is crazy. And again, just to reiterate, this is tax exempt dollars.
yes.
This is
So
what's being paid for. But yes, and so that's so crazy. 19 years later, you find
yeah.
out that he's a private investigator. That's just
Yeah.
insane.
Well, we found out. We actually found out before that he
Oh,
was a private investigator. It
okay.
just was that we didn't know exactly what he was doing until Marty got out and told us what was going on, right?
I
But
see.
anyway,
So all the
so
pieces fell into place when you had that
exactly,
information.
it's like you
Yes.
find out stuff later that you didn't know at the time. Anyway,
Yes.
so he was an employee and became our friend, and that you've got another picture, I think, of him with
Yes. Oh,
Janice, not
here,
that
well,
one.
here
Yeah.
we're, yeah. Well, let's do this one and
Well,
then we'll
let's
go.
do it this one.
They're
Okay.
chronological.
Well, that's okay. So in 1993, I went and I finally reconnected with my father. That's my father with the white beard, and my brother. I'm in the middle, and we're at Mount Rainier in Washington. And that was when I reconnected with my dad and my brother after about 13, 14 years.
That's amazing.
And
And how did that come about?
well, about a year, 2 years after I left, which we'll get to that point, but basically I went on a cross country road trip to visit my mother, and then I went to go see my brother, and I'd talked to him on the phone a few times. So I went to see him. He lives in Ohio.
Okay.
And then so we had already connected, but then my father, I was a little bit afraid to reconnect because he had gotten involved with this whole other group that weren't Scientologists, but it was something else. And I don't even need to go into it really, but
Okay.
they lived up in upstate Washington. And so in like 93 or whatever, my brother was coming out to visit my dad. And so I decided to fly up to Seattle. And then I went with a friend to go see my dad and my brother. And that's how we reconnected.
Awesome. And what did your brother and dad say when they heard from you after so many years?
Well, obviously they were like, my brother didn't understand. My dad kind of understood because he had been the executive director of a mission and he knew what was going on and all. But they were just happy to see me,
Yes.
and I was interested in what they were doing, and vice versa. And it was like water under the bridge, to be honest with you. I mean, I
Yeah,
don't remember it being super emotional or anything like that, other than just good to see you.
for sure.
But
Yeah.
yeah, that's when I reconnected with my dad. Now
Awesome.
this is not 93, and then he passed away in 1996. So it was only 3 years later that he passed away. But I went up to see him 2 or 3 times up in Washington during that time period. So that was cool.
That's awesome. I'm glad
Yeah.
you were able to reconnect and have that time with him.
Yeah,
That's
and my brother's still alive and doing well, and he watched part one. He loved it, so
awesome. That's great.
he's actually very successful.
That's
So
awesome.
anyway,
All
yeah, so
right. So
that's that.
moving along to the next slide. Here we
Okay, well,
go.
this is the mortgage company.
Yes.
One of the things about the mortgage company is that it's called City Mortgage, and the photograph you see here is going right to left, that's Paul Grady, and Janice is in the red blouse, his wife. In the
Yes.
middle there is a gentleman by the name of Kenny Lipton, who was an ex-Sea Org member, and he had been an executive in the Commodore's Messenger org, and he had actually blown around the same time that we all blew. And then in the red skirt is Janice's sister Terry, and
Okay.
then in the blue suit is Terry's husband Fernando.
Yes.
And I'm
So, and
taking the
again,
photograph.
you all
Yeah.
used to be top executives in
Yes,
Scientology,
that's
and
exactly
yeah.
right.
Okay.
And so we became well before the Aftermath Foundation, which does stellar work. Okay, we were a go-to place for people, for executives and people that left the Sea Org.
That's awesome.
Again, no internet, no telephones, no nothing, but somehow Janice would get a hold of people, and we ended up having the former senior case supervisor international, Jeff Walker, come and work with us at the mortgage company. He actually was my roommate for a while. We
Oh, wow.
had we had Jan Sims, who had been one of the enhancement executives in Religious Technology Front Center, and had been a good friend of Shelley Miscavige. She came with
Yes.
her daughter and worked with us. We had Cheryl Detchiff and her husband Gene. Uh, there were some others too, but basically we would get a hold of them, and they didn't have anything going on, so we said, well, come here, you know what I mean, we'll teach you the mortgage business too. So we tried to help people get on their feet as well.
That's amazing. And again, I'm sure that fueled David Miscavige to
Yes.
continue spending money on private investigators, because he cannot stand when people get together and compare
Yeah.
notes.
Exactly right. Because to be
Yeah.
perfectly honest with you, the people you see in that photograph, and
Yes.
myself and Jeff Walker and all that, we could have run Scientology. I mean, that's how senior we were. We
Right.
could have, if Miscavige wasn't there, in his mind, we could have taken over and run things.
Yes.
So we had the experience and the know-how. But anyway, so that's a picture of us at the when they bought a building for the mortgage company.
Awesome. All right. Moving on
All
here.
right, and then there's our little private investigator Dave Lubow with the mustache in the back upper right behind Janice, and
Okay.
then Fernando and Terry, and then a friend of ours. This is at Kenny Lipton's house. We were having a party, but this guy just basically infiltrated our lives, and we
Wow.
didn't think anything of it. Okay,
Right. Of course
until
not. Yep. Go ahead until I can't wait to hear this because I haven't heard
okay,
this.
all right. So until um, I was not doing well. We were not making money when we first started the mortgage business that first year at all. Like literally, I was running out of money. I couldn't pay my bills. I eventually, Janice had her baby, and I got my own apartment upstairs in the same building,
Okay.
and wasn't making enough money, and it became very stressful because if something happened or whatever, I got financially in trouble. Let's just put it that way.
Okay.
And I got to the point where I was going to be um, evicted from my apartment because I
Oh,
had a mortgage loan that I was going to close, and it didn't close, and I needed that money to pay for my rent. So I didn't know what I was going to do. So I ended up taking a job down in Texas, and I had a friend, a guy that I had met through a real estate agent in Las Vegas, and I told him, look, I'm not going to be able to help you anymore because I actually got, they actually, the person that we had that was running the mortgage company at the time was not an ex-Scientologist. It was actually a person in the real world who was partners with this other Scientologist. Well,
okay.
I got upset over this thing not falling through. Now, I don't know if you've experienced this, but uh, in the Sea organization, when people get upset and they yell or they they lose their temper, I mean, it's like a nuclear bomb going off usually, to regular people, to
Right.
people that were not in Scientology. If that happens, they think that the person is nuts. I mean, like, what do you do? I mean, it was total overreaction because that's
Yes.
how it was in the Sea organization, right? So I didn't even really do that. I just raised my voice at this person because they had messed something up, and they needed the money to get done. So I got fired. I got fired. It was in September of 1991 by the person who was not a Sea Org member or ex-Scientologist. I got fired.
Oh,
So
wow.
I didn't know what I was going to do.
Yep.
Right. So anyway, so this gentleman who became one of my best friends, unfortunately passed away about a year ago from COVID, but
Oh, I'm sorry.
we were friends for years. He offered me a job down in Texas. So I moved to Houston, Texas, and he let me move into his house. He actually was a millionaire. He was in nightclub business, and he said, come down here, you can work for me. And so I was happy to do so.
Yes.
Anyway, so while I was down there, I was only down there like 10 days, and all of a sudden Dave Lubow flies down to Texas.
Wow.
And that's when I first went, something's wrong with this guy. Why is he, he said he
Yeah.
was down there for some real estate deal, but I called, and this was, I left again, September 15th is a red letter day for me, because I left Las Vegas for Texas on September 15th, 1991, exactly 1 year to the day that I left the Sea Org. So 10 days later, he's down there and he's, hey, Mark, I'm down here. Let's go to lunch. And he has a big Cadillac car and all that. And I'm going like, what are you doing down here? He goes, oh, I'm checking out some real estate deal and all that. Right. Well, he's asking me questions about, aside from what I'm doing, just like, well, what are your feelings towards Scientology now? What about David Miscavige? Because we had told him about David Miscavige and our disagreements and stuff. And he was
Yes.
like probing, but enough to the point where like, this is not right. Something's
Yeah,
wrong
right.
here.
Red flag,
Yeah,
red
something's
flag, red
rotten in
flag.
Denmark, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
I just told him the answers and all that. So I called Janice and I said, Janice, I think he's a spy. We called him a plant. I said, I think
Yes.
he's a plant. And I told her what happened, right? And she goes, yeah, we were kind of thinking something was strange with him too. So that happened
And
to
was
me.
she aware that he'd come down to visit you before you
No, not
called?
until I told
Yes.
her. Not
Wow.
until
Yeah.
I told her. Right. And there was other weird things about him too. His wife and kids were in California. Well, meanwhile, he was working in Las Vegas with us. Do you know what I mean? Oh, where's your wife?
Yes.
She's going to come later. There was always an excuse. There was always something like, oh yeah, no, she's going to come at some time, right?
Yes.
Um, anyway, the other thing that happened too that Scientology did to the mortgage company is all of this was going on in 1990 to 1993 in this time period, which is
Yes.
when Scientology was trying to get their tax exempt status with the IRS. They were trying to get
Right.
tax exemption, right?
Yes.
So Miscavige was worried because Terry Gamboa had been one of the original, you know, executives at Author Services, but also like she also was part of other corporate entities and stuff like that, right? And she knew a lot about the sorting out of the corporate sort out and that type of thing because she had been part of that with David Miscavige. So he was worried about her going to the IRS.
That
Okay,
makes
we found this
sense.
out. We found this out years later, but
Yep.
that's what was going on. We found this out from Marty Rathbun and Mike years later. So there was a lot of attention on that. So they wanted to break us up, right?
Yes.
So part of getting me when I left, to go to Texas, is that they had sent in a con man, two con men, okay, to our mortgage company, and they were dressed as businessmen from Hong Kong. Okay, they were
Yep.
English, but they were from Hong Kong, right? And they had this thing where they met Terry and Fernando, and at the company, and they were interested in hiring them to go to Australia. Okay,
Okay.
and they knew that Terry's big passion has always been horses, and she has horses. She has horses now. Anyway, she's horses, right?
Yes.
So these two they were like investors and stuff or whatever. They basically did this whole thing where they said, look, we have a private company in Hong Kong, but we want to be able to send our clients to Australia to go horseback riding and on a ranch and yada yada yada, right?
Wow.
And
Yep.
so we would like to hire you to go to Australia to find us a ranch that we can buy, that we can send these clients of ours to, and you find the horses and that type of thing, and we'll pay you $100,000 a year on top of paying all your expenses, right?
Wow.
And
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 which,
it
of
was
course, would conveniently put Terry outside of the U.S., unable to be reached.
exactly,
Yes.
exactly. And we didn't know. I mean, I don't know when Terry and them found out, but Marty Rathbun spilled the beans in 2009 when he spoke with the Tampa Bay St. Pete Times, um, uh, for the Truth Rundown, where
Yes.
he
And I
goes
will
over
add
this
a
whole
link
thing.
to that series because it's a
Yeah,
brilliant series.
yeah. But basically, who's going to say no to that, right?
Right.
Well, the whole purpose was to get Terry out of the country because they were trying to negotiate with the IRS tax exemption. They didn't want her going in there and saying, oh no, David Miscavige runs everything in Scientology. Oh
Right.
no, here's what's happening with the money. Oh no, here's what L. Ron Hubbard was doing. You know what I mean? So
Yes.
they didn't want that. Okay.
No.
Likewise, they didn't want me speaking out either. So the
Right.
whole Texas thing was that didn't have anything to do with me leaving Texas. They wanted to basically financially destroy me. So this has never been confirmed, but we had another con man who came into our mortgage company in that first year who was an architect, right? And
Okay.
he was bringing in all these big potential commercial real estate deals. And I was the person that he contacted. And so we spent a lot of time and money going out and basically chasing blue sky, chasing nothing. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And that's one of the reasons why I got financially in a hole, because I wasn't making money. It was just basically a waste of time, right?
Right.
And
Yes.
the biggest thing that this guy did was he introduced me to this Japanese gentleman in Las Vegas who had a connection with a Japanese investor in Hawaii who wanted to invest in real estate in Las Vegas. Well, we need to wine and dine this guy. We got to we got to go over to Hawaii and show him that we know what we're doing, right? So
Yes.
this is coming from this con man guy. So okay, great. Well, we'll go and we'll set up this whole trip. So we set up this whole trip to Hawaii for the three of us, and including our main Sea or Scientology guy who got us in the mortgage business, right?
Yes.
And it was going to cost like $8,000, right? So the day before we were supposed to leave, the con artist guy said to me, oh, I'm sick, I'm not going to be able to go. And he was going to pay for the trip. That was
Oh
the
man.
agreement. He was
Yep.
going to pay for the trip. And he goes like, I'm not going to be able to go. And I'm going, and of course me trusting, I'm an idiot, trusting people. I'm joking, but that, you know what I mean?
Right.
I went, why don't I just put it on my American Express card, and then you can just pay me back when I get back.
I see.
Oh yeah, that's okay. Yeah, let's do that. So I paid for the trip on my American Express card, $8,500. We
Wow.
went and did the trip, came back. Hey, you got the money to pay me back? Oh no, he didn't have the money, and then
Right.
it took months, and I was chasing. You know what I mean? In other words, it was classic trying to crash me,
Yes.
crash me financially to the
And
point
and
where
and maybe you never got confirmation of that, but I can tell you Mark and I have had a very similar mirror of that story that we did get confirmation was entirely that exact scenario you're describing of Scientology sending people in, trying to lure us into a job too good to be true so that then they could turn around and destroy us. That was
yeah,
their
and
intent. And we had somebody who was a Scientologist that we talked to afterwards who said, "I'm really sorry they were holding my daughter against me who was a teenager." Anyway,
That's crazy. And
yep.
that's why, Mark's Scientology spy file series is so interesting to me, because I can imagine the files they had on us in Las Vegas. If they had
Yes.
files on you, they definitely had files on us.
Oh, absolutely. I'm
And
no
we've
question
asked
about it.
and we've asked Mike about it, and Mike doesn't remember everything. So he doesn't know, but I guarantee if we ever saw those files, there's a lot of things that were done to us that were
Yes.
really crazy. I mean, at the time you go, this is crazy. What's this from? And I
Right.
don't have any proof right now that that's Scientology related, but I have a sneaking suspicion, right?
Yeah, it's too much of a coincidence to be an actual coincidence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's part of the reason why I ended up down in Texas, is because I couldn't pay I was going to be evicted. I had no money, nowhere to go. And eventually I ended up filing personal bankruptcy. I mean, I
Oh,
couldn't pay my bills. When I was down in Texas, I ended up personally bankrupt. They
yeah, that's
wiped me out.
tough.
Okay. So
Yep.
anyway, so this guy, Dave Lubow, Terry and Fernando took the job to go to Australia. Okay. And so they're down there, and lo and behold, here comes Dave Lubow with his wife and kids down to visit them down in Australia to
Wow.
see how they're doing.
Wow.
And that's when we really went, okay, this guy's got to be a spy for Scientology. Okay.
Yeah.
And so we made the decision consciously. We didn't know for sure. Look, what do we care? We're not doing anything. We're just trying to make a living. Let's
Yes.
just, if we out him, they're just going to send somebody else out. We'll just ignore it. You know what I mean? And not tell them anything. And that's basically what we did. And then it was a couple years later that guy that was in the photograph, that the party photograph, he became friends with Dave Lubow, and he's a friend of ours. And he asked Dave Lubow, he goes, "What are you doing here? How do you make money and all that?" And he goes, "Well, it's not." He admitted to this friend of ours that he wasn't really there to be a mortgage officer, that he was there, a private investigator, that he was doing an investigation, and it was on us, you know.
Yep.
So that's how we knew, you know,
And when was that you for
probably
sure?
around 94. You know
Okay.
what I mean?
So for
Yeah.
3 years, he was
Hmm.
reporting to David Miscavige on all of you and your activities,
Right.
unbeknownst to you.
To
Yep.
to and I'll give you another example. When I went down to Texas that first year, I had to do I flew back to visit in Vegas, and I needed to do my tax return, my first tax returns since I've been there, right? Well,
Yes.
he was working for a tax return company at the time, rounding up tax. Oh, I'll get your taxes done, right? So
Convenient.
he did my taxes, or had my taxes done. Well, I guarantee you, he copied them and sent them to Miscavige and Scientology. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yep.
And it was our trusting nature. You know what I mean?
Right.
I know I sound like a rube, but I mean, I didn't have any suspicion that there was anything wrong.
Right.
That
Why would you?
that at,
You
at
had
a
left and you were just trying to get on with your life and start
right,
over.
that a
Yes.
religion would spend money to have people investigate and to infiltrate our lives when we were just trying to survive and live and
Right.
thrive. We didn't have any intentions of doing anything, right?
Yes.
So, and lo and
And just
behold,
just as a side comment, this is exactly how OSA and David Miscavige create problems for themselves. They will not leave people alone. They use their gazillions of tax exempt dollars to disrupt and try and destroy people's lives who are just trying to move on, like Mark and I.
yeah,
Exact same scenario. They
yeah.
would not leave us alone.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Now, lo and behold, Scientology got their tax exempt status in whatever it was, 93. I
Yes,
remember.
93.
Okay,
It was
93.
announced at the IES event so the International Association of Scientologists event in October of 1993.
Well, so Paul and Janice were able to basically buy into the mortgage company in Las Vegas. The gentleman who started it with, who had been a Scientologist, he's disappeared, and he's decided to go to back to California. But
Okay.
Paul and Janice, they worked into, a partnership with somebody else who was not a Scientologist to take over the mortgage company. And so Paul contacted me, and because I'd been, even though I didn't get paid a lot, I was the top loan officer. I mean, I've always been good at sales. I don't know why. I guess it's just because I can communicate and make, complex things simple. But
Yes.
anyway, he wanted me to come back. And so in 93, he basically offered for me to come back and work. They'd increased the commissions, and they'd taken over the company. And so I decided, yeah, I'm going to move back. So I moved back to Las Vegas at November 1993, right?
Okay.
And you
Yep.
said the IAS thing was when?
October
Okay.
1993. That was
All
when it
right.
was announced. It had been sealed, I think, earlier that year with the IRS, and then it was announced at that October event.
Well, shortly thereafter, after I came back, it wasn't just a few months later that Terry and Fernando were coming back from Australia, because the Australia thing had fallen apart. They never
Interesting.
ended up buying a place. I think they rented a ranch, and they had horses and all that, but they didn't need to be out of the country anymore. And why would Scientology pay for such a thing? I mean, we
Right.
didn't know this until years later when Marty Rathbun told us, but oh, we're going to come back to Las Vegas. So they came back, and then we were all back together again in the mortgage business.
Nice. It's just crazy. I mean, this is from beginning to end a situation of truth is stranger than fiction.
Yeah,
Oh my
exactly.
goodness. Okay.
So then the next picture, I think, Vaughn and Stacy. Do you have that one?
Yes, let me
Okay.
get that up here. Okay, here we go.
Okay. So this is a picture of me, probably around 96 or 97. But anyway, that's me in the center, and on the left of the picture is Robert Vaughn Young, and
Okay.
on the right is his wife at the time, Stacy Young, who's Stacy Brooks now. And this is up in Seattle, Washington. Now, Stacy had been my twin in the RPF that I talked about in part one, where
Yes.
we co-processed each other through and graduated from the rehabilitation project force together. And I had known Vaughn and Stacy since 1978, and they had been senior executives in Vaughn had been in the Guardian's office, the precursor to the Office of Special Affairs, doing public relations work with, you know, uh, for L. Ron Hubbard and for Scientology. He
Yes.
also was a main contributor to a magazine they had at the time called the Freedom Magazine, where they did investigations on the government and different things and stuff like that. And then Stacy had been an executive at Author Services as well. And then she got removed from that and was put into the Rehabilitation Project Force. But she was kept under wraps because Vaughn was extremely valuable to L. Ron Hubbard, because at the time he was working at Author Services, and L. Ron Hubbard had written his big book Battlefield Earth, and
Yes.
then he had also written eventually became a 10-volume science fiction novel called Mission Earth, right?
Yes.
And Vaughn was used by L. Ron Hubbard to edit the book for him, and he basically the L. Ron Hubbard, because he'd written such a voluminous Mission Earth, it was so big, he didn't know how to split it up. So Vaughn was the one who worked out where it should be split up, and then he did the editing and did corrections and all that. So he was extremely valuable to Author Services and to L. Ron Hubbard.
Yes.
Okay, so they were senior executives. Well, they left, I don't know, maybe a year before I did, the Sea Org,
Okay.
and they became the first. I don't know if they were the first, but they became paid consultants for a lawsuit against Scientology, where they were basically there was somebody who was being sued. This person was being sued by Scientology, who had been a public person who had been uh, he had been quoted, and his story was told in an article in Time magazine. That's a famous article in Time magazine on Scientology called "The Cult of Greed."
Yes. And again,
And
I'll link to that because that is
yeah,
a classic
I know there's a
and
lot
huge
involved with this.
event. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's okay. And that was in, I think the Time Magazine article, if I'm not mistaken, was ni- 1990 or
91. I think it was
1991.
91. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, anyway, so Scientology decided, I think, to sue this gentleman, and Vaughn and Stacy were hired by his attorneys to basically explain what is Scientology to, whenever there was a policy letter, they would be the people who would tell the attorney. The attorneys didn't understand how this stuff worked. So
Right.
they were paid, and they were paid really well to do that, right?
Yes.
Well, and then they were speaking out, and so Scientology did not, they were like persona, they were Mike Rinder before Mike Rinder. In other words, they were
the
person number
the
one, enemy
precursor.
number one. Exactly
Yes.
right.
Yes.
So I
And of course, in any legal action, that inner knowledge from someone who's held top executive positions is invaluable because it is very hard to unpack the terminology and everything else. So it makes sense that they were uh, doing valuable work, and Scientology was really mad about it, I'm sure.
exactly.
Yeah.
And the thing was is that Vaughn actually, he became, when the internet was just starting up in the early to mid 90s, or yeah, the mid 90s, right? And all of a sudden stuff was starting to come out on the internet. uh, you know what I mean? People were talking. There were chat groups and things. It was very rudimentary, but it was just starting that. And Vaughn used to do comments and blogs. Before Mark is Blown for Good did, there was Robert Vaughn Young, and he was very famous for that. But
Yes.
he predicted, he was one of the first person, he predicted that the internet would be Scientology's Waterloo. In other words, that the internet was going to destroy Scientology because there weren't going to be any secrets anymore. And
Right.
he's turned out to be pretty prophetic, pretty right.
Yep. Absolutely.
So anyway, when I came back to Vegas in November '93, I'd found out somehow that Vaughn and Stacy were out of the Sea Org and where they were in California. So I contacted them because Stacy had been my friend and my twin. So I went and spent Christmas with them, December of 1993, and we reconnected. And they were doing this work at that time, and so we became friends, and we were talking, and I would help them under the radar. If they had questions and stuff, I would help them and all that throughout the years. And then that photograph you saw in Seattle, that was
Yes.
taken the day after Scientology had come to try and get them to pay them off to stop speaking out, because Stacy and Vaughn were also doing media at that time. They did a 60-minute story. I mean, they were like out there, and this is before really anybody was out there doing this, right?
Yes.
And so, and I was their friend, So again, it was another reason for them to have a target on me, you know what I
Yes.
mean? Because I was in touch with these people,
Makes
And
sense.
so that was all going on. Eventually, Stacy and Vaughn, they ended up getting divorced. They had a lot of, oh, that's the other thing. They had a lot of fair game against them.
Right.
And a lot of it was they had this guy who was showing up at their house up there, and I sent them a picture of Dave Lubow, and they went, "That's the guy." So that was
Oh my
another
goodness.
confirmation that that's the guy, right?
Wow. Yeah.
They were doing cat
He was a
rescue.
busy bee, this Dave Lubow, and
Yeah.
he's crossed our path too. So yeah.
Well, so they were
I'd
doing.
love to see his paychecks from Scientology with their
I'm
tax exempt
sure.
dollars.
I'm
How much he
sure it
made
was
over the
millions of
years?
dollars.
Yeah, I'm
It had
sure
to be
too.
millions of dollars.
I'm sure
Anyway,
too.
aside from testifying, and doing stuff against Scientology, Stacy and Vaughn, they love cats, and so they started adopting abandoned cats out of their house. Okay, and one
Yes.
time I came up to visit them in their little house on Puget Sound, and they had. I mean, I thought we were living in a cat cage. There were 16
Yeah.
cats in this
Oh
little
my
house. You
gosh.
know what I mean?
I love cats.
I do too. Yeah. So anyway, but they were doing that, and they were adopting them out and getting them, working with the SPCA, whatever the thing is, right? Well,
Yes.
Scientology went after that. They got Dave Lubow basically to file a report, or somebody to file a report with the health department saying that these cats were AIDS infected.
Oh
So
my
then
gosh.
they
Come
had
on.
people come and investigate their house, and it turns out that then they also had a private investigator living next door with a listening device to listen through and on what they were doing. They had protesters show up out in front of their house saying they're
Wow.
religious bigots, and so they were under it big time.
Yes.
And Mike Rinder's already talked about this and stuff too, because he was running OSA at the time, so he was involved, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, so they were doing that. Eventually, it got to the point where, um, there were other things that happened. That they met Bob Minton, a guy named Bob Minton, who was involved with the whole. We're really getting into it now.
Yeah.
Lisa McPherson, the
Just a
lady
whole
that
other
died,
story. Yes.
right? That died.
Yes.
But anyway,
One of the
they got
tragedies of Scientology. So
yeah.
yeah.
Vaughn and
And
Stacy got divorced.
I'll find an article. I'm sure there's an article that summarizes the Lisa McPherson story, but she is
Yeah.
um, yeah,
Well, anyway,
wrongful death at the
they
hands of Scientology. We'll put it that way. Yeah, like I said, I'll link to the story so we don't have to recap
Yeah, I'm
that
not going to
here.
go into all the details, but Vaughn and Stacy got divorced, and Stacy got hooked up with this guy Bob Minton, who was involved, who basically helped them in Washington State. He actually bought them a house that they could actually turn into a cat and animal rescue, and that's how they. Stacy got involved with Bob Minton, and then
Okay.
that's when they decided to go to Clearwater. Bob Minton and they got Jesse Prince, and they all went down to Clearwater to protest against Scientology right there in Clearwater over the Lisa McPherson incident, right?
Yes.
So the reason I bring this all up is because I'm in touch with Stacy this whole time. We meanwhile have a new private investigator spy friend in at our mortgage company. Dave Lubow had been outed, so he couldn't be used, right?
Okay. And you want me to pull up the next picture here?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Here we go.
Okay, so this gentleman here, his name is Ferris Khan, okay? And he, again, was hired by our mortgage company. First, his wife was hired, okay, by our mortgage company as an employee, right?
Okay.
And then she said, "Oh, my husband, he does mortgages and all that, and what and so anyway, he got hired as a loan officer as well, and he became friends with Kenny Lipton and with Fernando and Terry Gamboa, and then with me, and he just was another guy. We didn't really particularly disseminate to him or anything like that, or his wife, but they became again friends and employees, right?
And yes, and sorry. So question. So what year was this that Ferris Khan showed up in your life?
Probably around 1998, 99.
Okay.
Okay.
And was Dave LeBeau still there
No,
or
no, he had
okay.
been gone. He'd left, and then, like I said, he was up harassing Vaughn and Stacy Young and all that, right? And then
Yes.
he eventually was the guy who was investigating and harassing Bob Minton. I mean, his track goes down. So this is a new guy that they sent in to
Okay.
replace LeBeau.
Okay.
And
Yep.
we didn't know at the time about Lisa McPherson and this death that had happened, and how David Miscavige was, possibly going to be indicted as part of this thing.
Right.
And that's a whole story, right? But
Yes.
again, it explains why they sent somebody into us, because they were afraid of us getting involved, because part of the defense, or part of the charges against Miscavige was that he runs everything in Scientology, which he did. We knew
Right.
that,
Which
so
we were all
they didn't
witness
want me
to.
involved with it. Yeah.
Yes.
So anyway, so I basically, Ferris Khan, uh, I decided to leave the mortgage company with Janice and Paul and go and get a job at another mortgage company.
Okay.
And Ferris all of a sudden gets real buddy buddy with me, right? Because I've gone to another mortgage company still here in Nevada,
Okay.
and but he's all of a sudden showing up and we're going out to dinner and this and that, right? Well, he has this whole ruse that he set up where this is 2000. This is
Okay.
2000, year 1999, 2000, right? So
Yes.
this is before cell phones, took off. There were no smartphones or anything like that. But he had moved to Phoenix, Arizona with his wife. They just had a baby. So all of a sudden he shows back up into my life because I've left the mortgage company with our friends. And he says, "Look, I'm starting up a cell phone company down in Phoenix where we're going to give away free phones if people will sign up for the phone service."
Okay.
Okay. And he had other friends, Ferris is Pakistani American. Okay. And he had other friends down there who had this business going and all that. And he was going to set up his own shops. And he said, "Listen, I want you to help me set them up. As a matter of fact, I'll pay you to write an employee manual, okay,
Hmm.
for our cell phone companies, right?" And so I wasn't making, very much money. I just started over with this new company. So I said, okay. So he paid me like, I don't know, $6,000, $7,000. And I worked out and I wrote a whole employee manual. But it was all bogus BS, right? It was just to keep me busy,
I see.
because he was getting information from me about Stacy Young and what her and Jesse Prince were doing, because I was in touch with them down in Clearwater, Florida. They were
Makes
friends of mine.
sense.
So
Right.
he was siphoning, and I got to the point where Ferris became my best friend for 10 years. Okay.
Wow.
Where I talked to him every day, sometimes 2, 3 times a day, about everything, about my business, about my life, about taxes, about what he was doing and all that. And then he and I liked to travel. So he would take me on trips. Okay. So the photograph that you see there is, we were going to go down to Clearwater, Florida. Okay.
Yep.
Because Ferris also, I
Wow.
told him about the protests that were being done against Scientology at the time by a group, uh, uh, you know, protests that were being done, and yeah, the Lisa McPherson Trust and all that. So he would be following it on the internet, and he'd be talking to me about it and getting my information stuff. Anyway, so I said, well, listen, I've got these friends down in Clearwater, Jesse Prince and Stacy Young. I said, why don't we go down to Clearwater and we'll go visit them? You know what I mean? And I can poke my finger in DM's face by showing up there. He'll freak out if I show up at this place.
Right.
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. That's a good idea, is what he said, right?
Okay.
Well, turns out I found out 9 years later that Marty Rathbun, that DM found out that I was coming down to Florida to visit Stacy and Jesse. And at the time, Miscavige was facing possible indictment. And he told Marty, he goes, keep Fisher out of Florida.
Yep.
So they got Ferris to say, look at Mark, instead of going to Clearwater, we need to go to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, to visit with this possible investor in my cell phone company. And it
Mm.
has to be that same weekend we were going to go down to Florida. So,
Convenient.
yes. So he goes, and I'll pay all the expenses for the trip. You don't have to pay for anything. So we went to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico instead of
And
down to
that's what this
Florida.
picture is here.
Yeah, and that was the last time I talked to Stacy Young, because I told her, I said, look, I'm not going to be able to come down. They wanted me to come down, but I said, I'm not going to be able to. And so I went to Mexico, and this is in Mexico with Ferris Khan, right? Well,
Yep.
again, lo
And
and
little did
behold,
you know this whole trip was paid for by Scientology,
Scientology. Yeah, it was all
just
paid
to
by
keep you away
Scientology.
from the Lisa
Keep me out
McPherson
of
case.
Florida. They didn't want me down
Yes.
there, right? So
Yep.
while we're down there in Mexico, we're there for 2, 3 days in Puerto Vallarta, all expenses paid, right? We go out to nightclubs and all that. Well, I didn't know this, but he surreptitiously took pictures of me with dancers around me, topless dancers, exotic dancers, whatever, which he then sent into Miscavige and all. They basically were trying to get blackmail materials, things to get, embarrass me and keep me silent, right?
Yep. Again,
So
SOP for Scientology.
yeah, yeah.
Yep.
And then the last night I said, "Hey, when are we meeting with this investor guy?" He goes, "Oh, we're going to have dinner with him tonight." So we went and we met this guy, and the guy had no interest. I mean, he looked like an ex-cop. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And it was all a ruse. It was all just to get me out and all that. Nothing ever came of it. And we ended up
Right.
flying back to Las Vegas, and that was the end of that. But that's where they did this, right? So
Yep.
in 2009, when Marty Rathbun spoke out to the St. Petersburg Times, um, before that article, I had got a hold of Marty. When Marty first came out, he was under the radar for a long time, and people didn't know where he was. When
Right.
I finally found out where he was, and I talked to him on the phone, he had written, say, if anybody wants to answer me any questions, just ask, right? So I got a hold of him, and I talked to him. I said, why were you guys so interested in us in Las Vegas? And that's where he told me the stuff that I've already told you. But then
Yes.
he also mentioned, like, he goes, oh yeah, and then around, I don't know, 2000, yeah, we had some guy take you down to Mexico, and because we didn't want you in Clearwater. I went, that's my friend Ferris. I just talked to him on the phone an hour ago.
Oh
What are you
my
talking about?
goodness.
I had no idea,
So he was your friend until Marty told you that he
until
was a
Marty told
spy.
me in 2009. Yeah. I
Wow.
said, that's my friend Ferris. What are you talking about?
Wow.
I couldn't believe it. I literally, but he had the details. Marty did. There was no way he couldn't have known. So I
That's
went,
crazy. So they
that
had private investigators on you personally for what, about 15 years?
no longer, since 1990 through till 2009 at the latest. So
So
19
19
years. Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
Wow. That
And
is
I was like
unbelievable. And
shocked,
here, I'll
right?
pull up the other picture that you provided here.
Yeah.
So here's another one.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's
this is
Ferris.
Ferris
You're
Khan
right.
as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we had become close friends. Like I said, I mean, we traveled, we did all sorts of stuff. This is we'll get into that one in a
Yeah.
minute. But anyway, we this was we traveled and stuff, and basically he was trying to get all sorts of different blackmail material and stuff. And look, I'm not a perfect human being, none of us are, right?
Right.
But I'm a single man, and I've never done anything illegal. And you know I've never had anything going on like that. Well, then they took the information, photographs, and things like that he gathered from me, and then of course they had a hate website just like you guys do. I'm
Right.
sure. I've never looked at it because I don't really care to
Yep.
see it.
I have the same view. I have the
Yeah,
same
I don't
view.
look at it because I know the intention of it is
Yep.
to interbulate, which is a Scientology word, which is basically upset you. You know what I
Yep.
mean?
And to stop you from speaking out. So
That's
yeah, no,
exactly
thank
right.
you. I will
They then,
continue speaking as will you. And thank you for your courage and bravery,
yeah.
Mark. Seriously.
Thank you. But anyway, but the thing is that they try and paint you as a picture that's not true, right? Well,
Right.
I know who I am,
Of
and my
course.
friends know who I am, right? But anyway, so that's what happened with Ferris Khan. So I then didn't tell him right away, right? Because I still was in touch with him.
Yeah.
So that's right at the time when the St. Petersburg Times was doing a second round of stories. And that's when Joe Child from the St. Petersburg Times, which then became Tampa Times, came to Vegas and interviewed me. And I told him the whole story and told him about Miscavige and all that. So I appeared in the second round of stories on that, right?
Awesome. And
And
I
I
will link to
waited,
that as well.
yeah, and I waited until the day that was published to then call Ferris Khan and tell him, I said, you might want to check out this internet story and all that. You may find some interest in it, right?
Yep.
So he then called me back, a few hours later, and of course he goes, He goes, "Oh," he goes, "that's not true, and it's all, it's all your fault." You know what I mean? I'm not going to say exactly what he said, but basically his point was he tries to turn it around all on me, like it was all my fault. You know what I
Wow.
mean? It wasn't
Yep.
like, oh, I said, all I asked him was, I asked him, I said, Ferris, I have one question for you. I want you to tell me the truth. Did Scientology pay you to spy on me?
Yep.
Yes or no? And he wouldn't answer the question. I asked him it several times and he would not answer the question. It was just all my fault, right? And
Yep.
that was the last
Cowards
time.
can never face the truth is the bottom
No,
line.
exactly right. And that was the last time I ever spoke with him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was hard. It was
Unbelievable.
hard
I
because,
mean, it is
you know,
believable. It's just a perfect example of what Scientology does to try and destroy people.
yeah. And it's hard because you try and trust people. You think that they're your friends.
Right.
And this went on for him, with him, 10 years.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And then you find out this betrayal. Okay.
Yes.
And I'll say one thing, okay, because he wasn't a private investigator. He was, again, somebody they hired to basically, he wasn't had no connection to Scientology whatsoever. Okay.
Right.
He was willing to accept money, okay, to spy on people that he had no idea what they were doing or what they went through in their life. Okay.
Right.
And people like that, and there's others that did the same thing to Mike and his wife, and I'm
Yes.
sure to you.
Yes.
Okay. I consider them lower than low. Okay.
Yep.
Because a private
Not lower
investigator,
than OSA, who hired them in the first place,
exactly. But
and
I mean,
David
like,
Miscavige, who spends tax exempt dollars, but in the
yeah,
same
but I
bucket for
consider
sure.
them lower
Yep.
than the private investigators who are ex-cops and who are also low.
I
But I
understand.
consider these people lower because they
Yep.
have no motivation other than just pay me. I will
Right.
ruin this person's life. I
Right.
will do what I can. I will rat them out. I'll make them look bad. Just give me money. Okay.
Yes. Yep.
And that to me is just disgusting.
Yep. I completely agree. There's no excuse. No, nothing makes that okay.
Yeah, I mean, to give you an example, I mean, I will forgive senior Scientologists who came out and go, okay, well, you guys did this. Mike Rinder's a perfect example. Great guy. I've always liked Mike, right? But he
Yes.
did stuff as the head of OSA, right? Well, I forgive him. There was no reason for him really to apologize, but I welcomed him with open arms, right?
Yes.
Because we were comrades, and he got fooled just like I got fooled and all that. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Yep.
But people like this, I don't have any sympathy for them.
Nope. I completely agree.
Anyway, that's my
Yeah.
sermon.
On that note, let's go to our next picture here. Well said,
Okay,
Mark. Thank
so
you.
this is, I think, around 2007. I want to say.
Yes. I think it was
There were
2008, actually. So the
okay,
anonymous movement, at least when I became aware of it, was
yeah,
in January 2008 when
and it actually was incredible.
it
The
was.
protests were all over the world, and they would get hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of people to show up outside Scientology orgs and buildings and protest
Yes.
at the snap of a finger.
Yes.
It
And
was
of course,
amazing.
yes. And of course, I'm sure you recall what triggered, or a big piece of what triggered that
The
whole
the Tom
anonymous movement
Cruise
was the Tom Cruise
Tom
video
Cruise
that was
video.
leaked. And then
Yes.
Scientology had it removed from the internet, which
Uh-huh.
prompted the anonymous internet people to go, hey, now wait a minute. And I don't know if you know this, but funny cross story.
Yeah.
For a long time, OSA was calling, were naming, they throw around slurs and hate terms and all this. Well, Mark and I, for a long time, were referred to by OSA as Mr. and Mrs. Anonymous. And we're like, hello, do you not know that these people are anonymous? You know exactly who we are. Where's the logic? It's gone.
Well,
Anyway,
same thing happened to me, okay? Because I showed up at a protest in Las Vegas. Now, I still was connected with Ferris Khan at the time because this is, like you said, 2008, whatever it was.
yes, 2008.
So I went to the one in Las Vegas and I wore a mask like you would see during COVID and the sunglasses and hat, and they took pictures of me there.
Yep.
And somehow they decided found me out. And then I went to this one here in LA, and this is where I first actually met you and Mark for
Yes.
the first time, was at
That's
this
right.
protest. And we're out, this picture is taken in front of the L. Ron Hubbard exhibit on Hollywood Boulevard, the main management building. And I always thought it was funny because the sign says, Mike Rinder blew, you should too.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Awesome.
I'm
How
flashing
fitting is
peace
that?
signs. I'm flashing peace signs. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so that was funny. So I went to that too, and of course I was being reported up. So the same thing happened to me, that they then tried to they tried to basically denounce me and say he's a member of Anonymous. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I'm a member of Anonymous. No, I'm not. I'm just there as a citizen
Yes.
protesting. I'm
As
not
a
a member of
concerned
anything.
citizen who has personal knowledge of
Right.
witnessing Scientology's crimes.
Right. So I'm a member of a hate group, Anonymous. I mean, it's ridiculous.
It is
So
ridiculous.
that's what that picture is.
Awesome. And then we'll end with you today.
Yeah, that's me today. That's me today. But
Awesome.
yeah, it's they do what they do, and it's really bizarre. Like I said, one thing I was going to tell you just briefly, that happened around 2006 or 7 is, and I was still connected with Ferris Khan, is that uh, before there was any real internet, there was a chat group that a ex Sea Org member set up for ex Sea Org members on. It was a Yahoo chat group. Okay, it
Okay.
was xso.com or xso or whatever it was, and you know who it is. It's somebody you know in Colorado. I don't know if I should mention his name, but anyway.
That's
Um,
okay.
but anyway, that's where we started reconnecting with people that had been in the Sea Org. I mean, that's where I reconnected with Jefferson Hawkins, for instance,
Yes.
okay, because he would comment on there and we would comment on there, and I finally got Janice to, she's the one who told me about it, and then we started commenting on there because we were reconnecting with a lot of our old friends. We had no idea. That's how we reconnected with Amy Scobie, was through that.
Awesome.
And that's
Yes.
when we heard the stories of what happened after we left. Like, and
Right.
that's where Blown for Good started showing up, and we started following that, and the
Yes.
different websites. So it started filling in the history of what happened after we left, right? Well,
Yes.
anyway, the person who set up this group, he decided he and his wife were coming to Vegas on vacation for a weekend. And so we organized up a bunch of people, ex-Sea Org members, to come and visit. And I took them all out to dinner. I was doing really well financially at the time. And by the way, I later I became very successful doing mortgages after that.
Awesome.
But
Good
anyway,
for you, Mark.
yeah, until we had the crash in the economy in '09, but that's another story. But anyway,
For sure.
but I took everybody out to dinner, right? Well, same thing happened where this Ferris Khan, I told him, yeah, I'm going out with these guys and all that. Next thing I know, just like what happened to Mark and his business, I had somebody calling my boss at my mortgage company and other contacts I had saying that, I was being investigated for mortgage fraud and this and that, yada, yada, yada. And it was a stupid name. It was the Citizens Commission for Mortgage Rights. I knew it was a Scientology, PI or OSA stunt
Of
immediately,
course.
right?
Yep.
So I called my boss, the same thing, and I told him, I said, listen, I told him my history about Scientology and that, and he goes, Mark, don't. He goes, if there was ever any complaints, it would have come through the state of Nevada, and said, don't worry. I said, okay, great. And then they contacted this famous sportscaster who I was doing business with at the time. He did advertising for me, and I called him ahead of time saying, you may get a phone call from this group, and I told him who they were. Sure enough, an hour later, he got a call from them, and he told them basically to stuff it.
Yeah.
So it's just
Nicely
stupid,
done.
and
Yep.
I'm sure that got the stats up for those OSA trolls, whoever they are, saying like, oh, we shut him up by contacting his boss. And I'm sure it's the same thing with the emails they sent out to Mark's business. You know what I mean? It's just a joke. It has no effect.
Yep.
Anybody that's done business with Mark or with me or whatever, they know that we're good people and that we are going to treat them fairly and we're going to do a good job. So it's just,
That's
I
right.
wouldn't worry about it. Anyway.
Yep. OSA is documenting their misuse of tax exempt dollars. Keep at it. Just keep
Yeah.
creating a record and we will use that. So there you go.
And like Mike Rinder says, they follow the same playbook that they followed because L. Ron Hubbard wrote it years ago.
That's
So
right.
they don't know how to do anything different. They just do the same stupid stuff.
Yep. That's right.
Anyway.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Okay, my last question before we wrap up, if you're good with
Okay.
it. You had made reference to that we would talk about how the layers of the onion started to unravel for you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I figured we would just finish up with that if you're okay with that.
Yeah. Well, what happened obviously when you leave, like I said, we actually were true believers. We were believers in Scientology, even though we had gotten together again after leaving Scientology. Our intention really was we believed L. Ron Hubbard was going to come back, even though he'd already died, right? So, and I knew that Miscavige wasn't playing by the same rules we all did. And we went,
Yes.
the history had been whenever L. Ron Hubbard had disappeared, and when he came back, if somebody would have been messing up, he would have dealt with it, right? So our viewpoint was, oh, Ella Rachel come back, deal with it, and then we'll come back, right?
Yeah.
Well, over time, this stuff started happening, and then that article came out in the Time magazine I told you about, right? But the key
Yes.
thing that really changed my viewpoint on L. Ron Hubbard and what I've been through is the same thing that Mike Rinder mentioned as well for himself. Is in 1994, after I came back here to Las Vegas, Terry Gamboa gave me the book Barefaced Messiah by Russell Miller. Okay.
Yes.
And
Brilliant
did you
book.
ever read that?
I
You read it?
did. I did.
It's an excellent book. It's about L. Ron Hubbard, the true story of his biography and what he did with documentation. And I read that and I was appalled by specifically by two things, which was that I could see the pattern that L. Ron Hubbard always turned on everybody who ever helped him. Like they would be like his best friends, his best investor, his best promoter, to all of a sudden like, oh, he's a communist. Oh, he's a traitor. Oh, we need to do him. I saw that from reading the previous history, but I saw that in the Sea Org when he got rid of David Mayo, Bill Franks, Kerry Gleason, all these senior executives that
Yes.
who had been dedicated their lives to him. Okay. And then even his wife, Mary Sue,
Yes.
he had her go to prison, okay, for crimes that he was intimately involved in. She
Yes.
took the rap, right? And then when she got out, he didn't have anything to do with her again. He
Right.
wouldn't even talk to her. Okay. And
Right.
that book really turned the tide for me. And that's when I went, okay, okay, all right, there is something really wrong here. So that
Yes.
was for me.
I appreciate you sharing that. I'll link to that book too because it is amazing. It's a very well done research of the true facts. And it's funny because when I escaped, I was still very fearful of Scientology because of my upbringing and
Right.
because I held on to a hope that one day I would reconnect with my family. But Mark started posting and PI started showing up and all this, and I just thought, let me educate myself. I can read a book and decide for myself, right? Isn't that what we were
Yeah.
always told? What's true for you is what's
Yeah.
true. So I thought, I'm going to read this book and find out the truth. And yeah,
Yeah.
I read a few other books as well, and it was very eye-opening.
Yeah, it was, and just so people know, it's also available as an audiobook now, so you can actually listen to it if you don't have the time to read it. You can listen to it driving around. I mean, I listen to a lot of audiobooks, but it's available also as an audiobook.
Awesome. Well, again, Mark, thank you so very much for your time. We will have one more part with your story specifically for my Where's Shelley series, and I
And
will
no
very
no
much look
problem.
forward to that.
And listen, I just wanted to compliment you. I've gotten so many comments on what a great interviewer you are
Oh,
and how
thank you.
great you are, and you're so compassionate, and you're just a really great person, and I really appreciate it.
I appreciate your time, Mark, and likewise, you did a great job telling your story, and I just thank you for your time and contribution here.
Okay, thanks, Claire.
Alrighty, take care. Until next time.